blockchain this morning, and our next speakers are going to tell us more on the same theme. We've got a fireside chat now between Mihai Alisie, co-founder of Ethereum and the founder of AKASHA and Bitcoin magazine, and he's going to be talking to Pete Townsend, founder of Norio Ventures. Please welcome, speaking about going from collected intelligence to collective intelligence, Mihai and Pete.
Good afternoon, Dublin.
Dear great Dublin.
How we doing? I see we got a nice change over the crowd going here, which is fantastic, and our minutes are ticking away, Mihai. You're down to 18:48.
Wow.
Let's get started. So I'm Pete Townsend, founder of Norio Ventures, principal at startup.com, author of Chaos, co-host of Money Never Sleeps podcast, available for download on iTunes and Spotify now. Mihai Alisie has joined us. He is visiting us from the wonderful canton of Zug in Switzerland, where his headquarters is of the AKASHA project, which he founded a few years ago, and also well known as a co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Bitcoin magazine. So welcome to Dublin.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hello everyone.
Mihai, so let's get started, right?
Yep.
So what we've kind of talked about is, with what you're doing right now, there's some important formative moments of your life that took place less than 10 years ago, more or less, that have kind of led you down this path. Maybe you want to just give us some insight into that.
Sure, so if I would pick the start of the formative moment, I would go to when I was around 10 years, and you know, as a little kid, when you hear like thunderstorms and you have lightnings in the sky and so on, it's like some magic and being afraid. But then I stumbled upon one of these little books in like physics in everyday life, and then I found out that if you count the seconds between you see the light and then you hear the sound, you can actually have an idea on how far that lightning is. So that kind of made me believe that the world around us can be understood if you try to. And then in the next years, I started learning English by watching movies with subtitles and playing games. So that was also like a really interesting kind of way of tapping into a whole different areas of knowledge that was kind of encrypted before. And I had a strong interest in computers, which led me to informatics in high school, and later on in cybernetic statistics and information economy in university.
Okay.
So this is around 2010. And this is also when, due to a family health problem, when my father had a stroke, we went to this physiotherapy hospital. This is, by the way, in Sibiu, Romania, from there originally. And that's when I heard from one of the nurses that I was lucky, and we were lucky to benefit from the treatment in this hospital and from the personnel, because the hospital was about to be shut down soon. And then I was like, why? Because I saw like miraculous recovering from my father, and there's also a younger person that was in a car accident recovering, so regaining the ability to enjoy life. And that's when I found out that actually there were some deep interests involved, and the owner of the building was actually the local church. I was like, what? How can that be? And then I said, no, I'm gonna do something about it. And then for the next couple of days, I really tried to figure out what I could do to stop this from happening. And in the end, I figured out, you know, that I cannot really do anything on my own. And that's when I started gathering like emails from all like the local newspapers, the local blogs, the local TV stations, and national. And I asked them to look into this problem. It's like, hey, this is a good thing we have. My name is Mihai, and this is what's going on. And actually, then the reporter started to go ask questions, like what's going on. The largest newspaper in the local area published actually my email, which was a bit of a surprise. And the effect was that two weeks later, a local politician capitalized on the public order, because people started to like, what? The church shutting this place down and so on, like how can that be? And then this local politician, hey, this hospital is actually a really good thing we have here, we shouldn't shut it down. So then the people were like, wow, that guy is a really cool politician, we should vote for him. And then the hospital was not shut down. That was for me a moment when I kind of, you know, the real change and making things happen is not just in the movies. And you can do something and things happen or don't happen because people know about them or don't know about them.
Yeah, so like you kind of said to me earlier, Mihai, that once you get enough people caring about something, that's when real change starts to happen.
Yeah.
Now, moving on from there and thinking about, yes, that important formative moment and knowing that you have a voice and that you can influence others, right? That Bitcoin Magazine, the opportunity to launch that came along. Tell us how that started and how did that lead to the next thing?
So basically around 2011, in a random conversation with someone from Argentina, thank you internet, he mentioned a decentralized digital currency thing named Bitcoin, but I forgot the name Bitcoin, but I recalled the decentralized digital currency. And then a couple of weeks later, I kind of remembered, and then I searched, and then I stumbled into Bitcoin. And I was coming already with this idea that some things happen or don't happen when people know about them. And when I was trying to learn, is this actually a real thing, or another Nigerian kind of prince thing? It was hard, especially in 2011. Like the main source of information was a forum, bitcointalk.org, a small village of sorts, and it was challenging. And that's when, across some of the articles I stumbled upon, were written by Vitalik, and we got in touch, and we kind of agreed that it would be a really good addition to the landscape. To have a coherent source of information, education, outreach, and so on. So more people get to know about this. So maybe it happened.
Yeah, and just again getting that community thing going, building that virtual global community, right? To an extent. Then after Bitcoin Magazine, that kept going, but Ethereum, you were a co-founder of Ethereum.
Yeah. So after launching Bitcoin Magazine and so on, it was like a really interesting opportunity to get to know this space from within, rather than trying to look from outside. And also it gave us, in the beginning it was like, oh, Bitcoin is the one, it's the silver bullet and so on. But it also was a learning experience for us to understand the limits of what this thing can be. It's not a one size fits all, and it's like all our problems are solved and so on. It was clear as until 2013. That it was mainly designed as kind of a digital cash, single use case or like application. In this case, a decentralized ledger for
digital cash. Yeah.
And then around the end of 2013, it was also during some of the conversations with Vitalik that we were talking about DAOs as the distributed autonomous organizations and how would that fit into the bigger picture. It was also a moment where we kind of realized that you have. And also, the question, what is blockchain? That also the explanation shifts as your own understanding of what this thing is evolves. And it was this understanding that evolved from blockchain equals money of sorts, to blockchain equals a world computer, a general purpose, a programmable kind of thing to smart contracts. So that was a really big shift, and if you think about it, we're here in the first decade after the invention of this technology, still scratching the surface of what can be done. This is in January 2014, together with Roxana and a few others, we traveled to Switzerland as a co-founder of Ethereum. One of my what I spearheaded was a search for a jurisdiction. What could be the home for this project? And that's when we went to Switzerland. And the Zug canton also might be known as Crypto Valley for some. So if you heard that, that's Zug in
Mihai came up with Crypto Valley, right? Down with Silicon, up with crypto.
So it was during one of the discussions with the local authorities when I was trying to also present the opportunities. Like this thing is not just about Silk Road, and there was all about the classic kind of cycle of mainstreams. Like what about the children? It was like there's more than just the bad stuff. And following this, there was the genesis of the Ethereum blockchain. So after we had like a very successful, I think for a brief moment it was the biggest crowdfunding campaign successfully as a one-time event. So we raised the equivalent of $18.5 million in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It was kind of a cypherpunk inception way of like using a digital cryptocurrency on blockchain to build the next blockchain.
Yeah.
And when the blockchain was launched in Ethereum, and you had the first block, it's like everyone's still working. The second block, the third block, and first 100 blocks, like, whoo, this thing is live. So from like a dream of sorts, it became like a platform for other people to build their dreams and also I felt that as a co-founder, my duty it was kind of fulfilled.
Yep.
And I stepped down from the Ethereum Foundation as a vice president and focused my energy on trying to figure out what we can now build with these things. It's real.
So tell us about the inspiration for the AKASHA project.
So I think in a way, if I look at these moments that we briefly touched upon, I think it's a continuation of that lesson. And like the pieces that we tried to mix first was like, can we build a decentralized social network that does not have a central point of failure or us being in the middle of this information flow between people? And after a few weeks of testing, together with Marius and a few others, we actually got to the point, yes, this can work, but it's not just a blockchain thing. So we have Ethereum, and beside Ethereum, you have a bunch of other complementary technologies. So like one of them being the interplanetary file system, or shortened as IPFS. And basically we use the IPFS to store the information, the content, so you have like videos, pictures, text, and so on, and use the Ethereum blockchain as an index, so people could see what has been published, and then people would connect to another person, and peer-to-peer actually.
Yeah, that's a big thing. It is all peer-to-peer, right?
Yeah. So I think we were, if I'm not mistaken, the first ones that we actually tried to mix this technology in this way, and successfully.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of normal. It's like, this was like early, or actually late 2015 after the launch.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about some of the social networks that are out there today, there is this central priestess of trust, component to all of that, and that opening that up and saying that, well, it doesn't need to be about one single group that has control of all that data, and that it can just be, it's distributed, it's decentralized, it operates on a peer-to-peer basis. That's a pretty strong proposition.
Yep, and there's also like this, we're like in such a bad position, like this is such a big problem. When you think about like, imagine this for a second. So we have like this 7 billion plus planet filled with beautiful human beings, each unique in their own way. And then you have like this giant hyper-centralizing the relationship established between these human beings. And it's like we have this entity running this service, you have the Facebook and others. But in particular, you have Facebook being the biggest one, and you have this entity with the ability, with a single command line, to silence half a planet. It's like, where's the intelligence in like that intelligent species?
Yeah.
And you also have this other problem, so I'm going to use this as a huge prop here.
Absolutely.
You have the data, information, knowledge, wisdom kind of triangle. And you have like the lower layer being data, and then you have like information, and then you have the knowledge, and then hopefully at the top there you have like some wisdom. But in the current kind of situation, we have like vast amounts of data, the big data, and you have like some information, and when I say some information, it's like when it comes to Facebook and other social network operators, you have like the information that is derived from your personal data that helps them serve you like better ads. And then, the knowledge and wisdom is almost like very thin, so you don't have actually a pyramid there. So on the other side, you also have this understanding and this talk about the global village. But whenever you will hear this again, like about the global village, also ask who sees themselves as the mayor of this global village. And in these cases, like you have usually an entity or corporation or some sort of person kind of already projecting themselves in that power position. And on the other side, like with AKASHA, what we want to do is like we have like a layer of open data and like the information and all this stuff that can be derived with an approach that is interoperable by default. And then, in the hopes that we can redistribute knowledge and hopefully from that derive some wisdom in the society as a whole. Because we need it if we are to stand a chance to solve some of these big challenges that we face as a civilization.
Some of these peer-to-peer opportunities that we talked about before, Mihai, were along the lines of improving humanity and improving the ability for individuals to use the creative side of their brain, right, rather than the analytical side of the brain. And by having this information presented in a decentralized way, have these communities connected. What are some of the perhaps use cases that you think could be interesting along the lines of helping humanity get back to that notion that is brought about in the book *Sapiens* of 100 to 150 people being kind of the real climax point of what a group can get done. Right?
So there's like a lot of interesting research on this topic, and maybe this is a rabbit hole that I explored a bit deeper because we were operating this like the social network space. And starting from the brain, right? We are wired with this social brain, and in nature you kind of have these natural incentives, and you have like sex feels good, you ensure the reproduction of the species. We have kind of a similar, let's say, desire, or we long to belong to a community or some group of people. And an assumption here might be that this is nature's way of incentivizing us in connecting into these kind of networks. So, like, one of the key elements of humanity's success to this point was the ability to come together in groups and achieve what we cannot achieve as individuals. So, in a similar kind of fashion, when we also look at the collective intelligence versus collected intelligence, again, if we use this pyramid, today, and the way it's this information society is like a collected information society, right? So when I say collective intelligence, this also complements the side, and you have many people and projects talking about AI, but when I say CI, it's I know this metaphor is not really applicable because we usually use both hemispheres, but I would say that the AI might be more like the logical, analytical side of the brain. And then on the other side, we have this creative side that is kind of natural to us as humans, which kind of the creative side, more the right hemisphere. And many of the talks, and either about the future of our society or the implication of technology and so on, seem to kind of discard that humanness, that side of us, and what is humanity without that thing? A big question there. So that I think also points, and the CTO of NASA in his very cool presentation was talking about, you have this group of people on Mars, for example, or so. It's what if they cannot communicate with the home planet? It's what happens to them? So I would argue that we as individuals being network and part of these groups, we exhibit this naturally, this collective intelligence, but simply until now we either discarded this side of our humanness, and in general, masses have been seen as this dumb thing, from the Freudian and so on, in general, when we're looking at the psychology. But I would argue that we're actually very smart, and if you would look into the future, it's what does it mean also when looking at it, the bigger picture, applying this on planet Earth, let's say for now, and you have the Internet of Things, smart cities, and all this discussion, but what is a smart city if not it would be composed by smarter citizens? So I come from this perspective where we could use this ability, natural ability of us to connect with each other, and these mini supercomputers in our pockets to build something that facilitates this collaboration between us as individuals and as part of collectives without losing our individuality. And something to keep in mind here is that, some people see this collectiveness as using the uniqueness of the individual, being absorbed in a bored kind of fashion, but that would be a dumb collective. It's you need diversity. So all the talk on the differences among us being standing in the way of progress, this is actually a feature, not a bug. That makes the collective smarter, it brings up and opens it to many perspectives, and I'm talking about, race, knowledge, technology, a bunch of other things that come together in not something limited to something specific. Diversity is good in all areas here.
Okay, so I really like the smart cities concept of, rather than smart cities, we're talking about smart citizens, and that each of us are organic sensors in our own right, picking up human feeling and emotion and perception and sensation, and that then becomes part of a collective, right? And that you are bringing these communities together virtually. I think it's a pretty strong proposition. A couple of the other things you talked about as well, Mihai, were imagine being able to let a community know quicker that a storm is coming or a tsunami is coming, right? Perhaps crowdsourcing the conversion of an exoskeleton that is used for military purpose, using that as to solve paralysis, right? Or even the getting a big pharma company to open source the development of a new drug.
Or not even relying on a big pharma company to steer the direction of our research, but rather tap into the collective intelligence we have and analyze from a purely humanitarian, or also from a humanitarian, not just a profit-driven kind of what makes sense. Oh, we want to invest in this, even if it will cure this disease for billions of people because it's not patentable or easy to make a profit from. And I think this also points down to the way we're kind of in a hangover from the industrial kind of society and the military top-down control view, where even if you look at the companies and in general, when you have a description of someone, it's Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operating Officer. Why is it called an officer? So it's like, I think that points back to the military kind of way.
It does.
And in military, in general, when you look, you have strategy and planning around the enemy. But the more you kind of base your whole strategy and your plans around the enemy, the more you become like the enemy. So hopefully, in the next, and what we will understand and what we can bring in the future would be this not just coming together against the common enemy, but also realizing that it makes sense and everyone benefits if we come together for the common good, looking at those win-win-win situations, and it is possible. Also, multi-testing of like various governance systems, and that today we operate in a world that was built under the limitations and some of the restrictions around 200 years ago. So,
Absolutely. It's outdated. It's become outdated. Looking at the future, with what AKASHA will be enabling, what are you most excited about?
That's a big one. So I think this event is a perfect example of some of the things to be excited upon, and it's not just one particular piece of the puzzle. I think the exciting thing is the convergence of all these things coming together. So you have the communication technology, you have the manufacturing technology like 3D printing, a blockchain, and introducing also these governance systems that you can experiment with. You have also the cryptocurrencies like information as value. So I think what these things and what gets me most excited about is that without even realizing, we're kind of building the pillars or the puzzle pieces that would enable us to build new socially or like operating systems for our society. So it doesn't have to be, one thing to rule them all. It can be many, coexisting and co-evolving. Monocultures in general are not ideal, right?
Gotcha.
So you're talking about benefits when it comes to resilience, faster response times, the ability of people to organize without having to go through that command and control. And it's like you have the increased efficiency. And sometimes, if you think about it, why do we have these institutions? Why do we have this kind of government idea? It was designed to serve the citizens and to make their lives better. So if we have now the pieces to kind of upgrade or like build the next model, why not?
I gotcha. Makes sense. Mihai, thank you. Really appreciate you coming to Dublin to do this. Thank you to everybody out in the crowd, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Great.